Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 7th of June of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The most important, the most interesting updates are coming from the line between Orekhov, Gulyai-Polye and Velika Novoselovka. According to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians launched their greatest counter-offensive operation, and in comparison with the previous day, today the Ukrainians involved more forces, and mainly the Ukrainians were attacking on the line between Orekhov and, let's say, the western part of Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The first updates we received from the western flank of this area, from this vicinity of the small settlement by the name of Kamyanskaya. The Ukrainians were using the forces of 128th Mountain Assault Brigade, and I'll remind you that those forces, that brigade was and is the part of Maroon, a tactical group, and the Ukrainians were attacking settlements like Lapkovo and Zherebyanki. So that was the first movements, and from this area we received the first updates about the Ukrainian offensive operation. The Russians are saying that as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians during those attacks were defeated, and of course had a lot of losses and were forced to step back. Just during the first attempt, during the first wave, the Ukrainians in attacking in direction of Lapkovo, the Ukrainians lost 4 tanks, 4 armed infantry fighting vehicles, and 40 soldiers. Later, the Ukrainians took a decision to bypass Lapkovo and to attack the southern settlement by the name of Zherebyanki, this one. For these purposes, the Ukrainians were using a group of 6 tanks, but they were defeated in this area as well. And probably the Ukrainians were trying to block and to cut the road, supply road that the Russians were using to send reserves in direction of Lapkovo. And probably that tactic worked out because the sources were saying that Ukrainians managed to capture the northern part of this settlement Lapkovo, and there were a few updates like before I started making this video that the Russians during the counter-offensive operation were able to force the Ukrainians to step back from this area, but let's wait a little bit, and probably the Russians were able to do this because if you remember, during the attacks in direction of Vremivka tactical bridge, had the Ukrainians during the day captured at least 3 settlements, but later they were forced to leave them all because during the time before the night came, they couldn't establish bridgehead, they couldn't prepare fortifications, so they took a decision to step back from those positions, and currently probably the Ukrainians would be forced to leave this area as well. Another area of Ukrainian attacks was on the south of Orekhov, and for these purposes, the Russians are saying that Ukrainians were attacking in direction of small settlement Kopany, this one. Also, the Ukrainians were attacking in direction of Rabotina, this area, and the Ukrainians were attacking in direction of Bilogoria, this one. So based on all mappers, Bilogoria, this small settlement, is under Ukrainian control, so probably the Ukrainians were attacking Novopokrovka. The Russians are saying that all those attacks were repelled by the Russian forces. Furthermore, the Russians reported that just during the attack in direction of Novopokrovka, the Ukrainians lost 3 tanks and 1 infantry armored vehicles. The results of clashes on the line between Kopany and Rabotina we haven't received yet. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that to complete this operation, the Ukrainians have redeployed, for these purposes, they have redeployed the forces of 115, 116, 117, and 118th mechanized brigades. The total number of Ukrainian forces who were involved in attack specifically in this direction were around 20,000 soldiers, 19 tanks, 180 armored vehicles, and something around 2,200 artillery systems of different types of artillery systems, not just like classic artillery systems. I'm not saying that all those forces were involved in that attack, but we can say that currently these forces are concentrated and are located in the vicinity of Orekhov. So for these purposes, let's move these brigades to the south, trying to understand like the real concentration of Ukrainian forces in this area, and the final brigade we need to locate is 115th Brigade. So this is the current structure of Ukrainian forces on this front line. So we see that currently there are very overpopulated. Don't forget that there are still, we can find the forces of 33rd Mechanized Brigade. There is the 71st Jaeger Brigade in this area. Don't forget about 128th Mountain Assault Brigade, and of course 65th Mechanized Brigade. So probably there are more forces that were announced by the Russian forces, and probably they were saying just about the redeployed forces, but not about the forces that were already located in this area. Probably the Ukrainians will stretch these forces during the few days, because they didn't want to discover their positions, and using the railroad ways during the previous night they were trying to move as much as possible. And I believe that currently the Ukrainians are attacking to the south, and from the other side they're trying to stretch their forces along the front line from the Dnipro River to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Also, the Russians reported that just during the previous 24 hours, just during the battle for Orekhov bridgehead, let's call it like this, the Ukrainians lost one MO depot of 128th Brigade that later started offensive operation on the western flank of this area. Also, the Ukrainians lost the two MiG-29s in this area. The first one was destroyed yesterday, but the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported about that just today, and that MiG-29 was destroyed in the vicinity of Lubitske. And during the active phase of offensive operation today, the Ukrainians lost another MiG-29 in the vicinity of Kamyshevaha. Probably the Ukrainians, for these purposes, were using the airfields in the vicinity of Dnipro. So they're attacking, the Russian position this way, and then they're going back to this airport, and probably most of those aircrafts were destroyed during the fly on the way back home or something like this. We haven't received any updates neither from the Ukrainian side nor from the Russian side about destroying of any Russian aircrafts in this area. Furthermore, in the vicinity of Energodar, above the Dnipro River, the Ukrainians lost another Su-25 in this area, and probably that was there are like two goals that Su-25 could achieve in this area. The first one is to support the 128th Brigade during their offensive operation in the vicinity of Kamyanska, or probably this Su-25 was support and cover the Su-24 that were carrying the Storm Shadows missiles that Ukrainians were planning to launch against the Russian positions, and let's say on the line between Mariupol and Melitopol. We haven't received any updates about destroyed Su-24, so probably the Ukrainians are trying to protect and secure this type of forces as possible. Very interesting updates. Also, we got another very interesting update from this area. The Russian drone Lancet, it's like a self-guided drone, captured and made a photo of Western air defense system Iris-T, and the Russians claimed that during this day, during the active phase of battle for Orekhov bridgehead, for the Zaporozhye bridgehead, they managed to destroy one Iris-T system. We still haven't received any video confirmation of that. I hope that the Russians are not going to provide us another video of another destroy of another tractor in this area, and probably now they're going to give us better picture, better video, and real confirmation that they destroy this type of weapon, Iris-T air defense system. Now we're going to the eastern flank of this battle, and now we're going to talk about Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Russians are saying that the Ukrainians were attacking, the main direction of Ukrainian attacks was from Gulay Pole in direction of small settlement by the name of Mezhirich, this one settlement. That attack was made by the forces of 23rd Mechanized Brigade, and that attack was repelled by the Russian forces. Another two attempts the Ukrainians made in direction of on the line between Algovska and Livadne, and the second attack took place in this area from the line Novodarevka. All those attacks were repelled, so the Ukrainians redeployed their 23rd Brigade, and they increased the area of responsibility of that brigade on this line. So all those attacks were made by the force of 23rd Mechanized Brigade. When talking about this area, the Russians reported that they destroyed the headquarters of 44th Artillery Brigade in this area. So I'll remind you that currently there are at least 3 artillery brigades that were spotted in this area. There is 44th Artillery Brigade, 11th Artillery Brigade, and the artillery group of 46th or Mobile Brigade. So 3 like different squads, 2 brigades and 1 regiment, artillery regiment. Also, the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians using the forces of 31st Mechanized Brigade in direction of Neskuchne and Storozhova, and the Russians are saying that that was the only region where the Ukrainians managed to achieve some success, and as a result of fierce fightings in the vicinity of Storozhova, the Ukrainians managed to penetrate the Russians' defense orders and to capture positions over this hill, over this landfill. This is the high position. The Ukrainians managed to move their tanks, mechanized probably forces, their eyes, and currently, as I understand, the Ukrainians managed to establish control over this physical and artillery control over this bridgehead by control of these hills. And this is a problem for the Russians. This is the highest position in this bridgehead. Currently, the Ukrainians changed their tactics. They're not trying to penetrate. They're not trying to make a deep attacks or something like this. Currently, they're planning and trying to create a bridgehead and to establish control over the tactical landfills and tactical hills. And one of those tactical hills was captured by the Ukrainians during the battle for this area. We haven't received any updates about any activity of the 37th Marine Brigade in the vicinity of Zolotaya Niva and the small settlement Novodonetska, or in the vicinity of small settlement Blagodatna. So probably after this brigade was defeated yesterday, they took a decision to make a small operational pause, but I believe that tomorrow they will restart their offensive operation and they will give some time to rest for the forces on the western flank of this area. So as you can see, based on the events, based on the actions that took place today, we see that Ukrainians currently have at least 2 directions of main attack. The first one is from Orekhov to the south in direction of Takmak. So this is the first flank. It's the western flank we were talking during this video. The eastern flank is the operation against the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, and there is one area that the Ukrainians haven't launched any offensive operation, and I'm talking about the area between Gulyae Polya to the south. So now I'm going to speculate a little bit. So probably based on this eastern flank activity and the western flank activity, the Ukrainians currently are trying to stretch the Russians' reserves and to pin down, to freeze a very big part of those reserves on the western side and on the eastern side, trying to clear their way from Gulyae Polya to the south. And based on that, I expect that the main attack that Ukrainians are planning to make during the next days is this direction from Gulyae Polya to the south, and the main area that Ukrainians are trying and planning to capture is this let's call it railroad ways square. So this is the area that Ukrainians are planning to capture based on this configuration of the front lines and attacks that we saw during the previous days. As you can see, this is a perfect bridgehead. Currently this area is completely encircled with the railroad ways. It will ease the Ukrainians, if they're able to capture this area, to defend themselves. And this is going to be the first, and this is going to be the results and the goals of the first phase of this counter-offensive operation, to establish control over this square. Furthermore, there is a railroad ways that goes exactly from the mainland to this territory. So if the Ukrainians capture this territory, they will be able to support and supply this area with using the railroad ways, and after that they will start developing this bridgehead, and also by this attack the Ukrainians will be able to cut supply and support between the mainland and Zaporozhye area using the railroad ways. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, without including the numbers of the clashes during this day, the Ukrainians lost 190 soldiers, 40 armored vehicles, including 8 tanks and 5 artillery systems on the battle for Zaporozhye and Vremivka tactical bridgehead. These numbers don't include the losses of the Ukrainians during the 7th of June. These numbers will be included in tomorrow in the next report. Now we are going to Avdiivka and Bakhmut area, Avdiivka and Marinka area. We haven't received any updates from the Russians, neither from the Ukrainians. So the front lines are stable. The Russians continue pushing in Marinka. The situation in Avdiivka is covered with the fog of war. The Russians are saying that they managed to repel the Ukrainian attacks on the north of Vadyana and Opotna, and these two settlements are under 100% Russian control. So no changes. The only update we have stuff is that the Russians destroyed 2 ammo depots of 110th Brigade in the vicinity of Avdiivka. Now we are going back to Artyomovsk. As you can see, there were a lot of updates from this area as well, and the Russians reported that Ukrainians made at least 8 attempts to attack Bakhmut all over the front line from the north to the south. And the Russians reported that during those clashes, during those storming operations, the Ukrainians lost 415 soldiers, 17 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks and 2 artillery systems. So as you can see, the losses for the Battle of Artyomovsk were even higher than the losses for Zaporozhye and Vremivka tactical bridgehead clashes. The Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions from the north using the forces of 56 motorized brigade in the area, in the vicinity of, let's say, Orekho-Vasilievka and Dubovo-Vasilievka. That was the first attempt to attack, and using the forces of 56 motorized brigade. A little bit to the south, the Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Yagidne, and that attack was made by the forces of 57th motorized brigade. If you remember, yesterday the Ukrainians made the same attack in direction of Berkhovka, but yesterday they were using the forces of 77th Air Mobile Brigade, so probably the Ukrainians are using the tactic of Korysil. So today one brigade attacks, tomorrow another, and this allows brigades to make some kind of regrouping, recovering, and they are trying not to give the Russians even a second, even a minute to get rest and to relax. Furthermore, the Russians reported that attacks in the western part of Bakhmut were repelled as well, and probably the same attacks were made by the 57th motorized brigade. And I reminded that yesterday the warehouse of that brigade was destroyed, so that was probably the reason why yesterday the Ukrainians couldn't use the force of 57th, and they were attacking in direction of Berkhovka using just the forces of 77th mobile brigade. Now we're going to the south, and the Russians reported that Ukrainians made at least few attempts to attack, and there was an attempt to attack Klishchevka from the north, and for this purpose the Ukrainians were using the force of 5th Assault Brigade, and the Ukrainians were attacking from the south, and for those purposes the Ukrainians were using the forces of 24th Mechanized Brigade. And now we understand the purpose and the reason why the Russians were attacking that 24th Mechanized Brigade during the previous months heavily. They were trying to attack headquarters, ammo depots, and so on, and now we see that this 24th Mechanized Brigade is some kind of reserves and some kind of support forces for the Ukrainians to attack Klishchevka from the south. Both those attacks were repelled, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back on their main positions. When we are going a little bit to the north, the Russians reported that they destroyed another Su-27s in the vicinity of Nikiforovka. So as you can see, during the previous day, the Ukraine lost at least 2 aircrafts. So you understand, you need to imagine and realize the real level of fightings and clashes all over the front lines, and they are very dramatic and very terrible, of course. And now we're going to Siversk bridgehead, and probably the Russians took a decision to make a small operational pause. There were no updates. The only thing we got that they destroyed the headquarters of 67th Brigade in the vicinity of Dubrova in the forest, but without any changes on the ground. And when talking about Kupiansk and Liman front line, we have the same situation. There are no clashes, no activity in this area. The Ukrainians are doing small attacks using the commandos and scout squads. They're trying to attack and push the Russians in the vicinity of Masyutovka and Liman Pervy. I'll remind you that exactly in the vicinity of Masyutovka, the Russians were trying to secure and to push the Ukrainians as far as possible from the pipeline, ammonia pipeline, but as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians managed to damage that ammonia pipeline. There was a very heavy explosion in that area, and currently this territory is completely polluted, and the Russians are saying that few civilians were suffered as a result of that pollution, but the Russians continue holding this area. But as I understand, after the Russians repelled attacks and after that pipeline, ammonia pipeline was destroyed, I expect the reduce of any activity in this area from the Russian side, because either they're going to attack Dvorechna by crossing this river, Oskol River, and developing the bridgehead on the Ukrainian side, or they will now they will stay and wait the results of offensive operation on the south. When talking about Belgorod, the Ukrainians still claims that they control Novotavlazhanka, the publish more and more videos. The Russians are saying that they control just the forest in the southern part of the settlement. And today the head of Wagner's, Yevgeny Prigozhin, published another video, and he made an ultimatum to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, saying that if the Minister of Defense Shoigu can't and is not going to secure and solve the problems in the issues in the vicinity of Belgorod region, then he himself, Prigozhin, will move to Belgorod region and he will redeploy his Wagner forces, and after that the Wagners will start their own operation without any order from the Minister of Defense to secure the area, Belgorod area, from the Ukrainian forces. And probably, as we discussed, this is the plan, and this is going to be the situation in this area within the next few weeks. He made an ultimatum to solve the issue in Belgorod within the 14 days. So today is the 7th of June. So somewhere by after the 20th of June, we may see the real big return of Wagner, and they will continue clearing operation and securing operation on the Belgorod borderlands. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.